Okay, so today, guys, we're going to be discussing part of customer discovery. Really, what this deals with is market sizing. Why is market sizing important? Market sizing is important because we have to know the size of the market that we're going to attack. And as an investor, if I'm looking at your company product idea, I want to know how many people you're going to be able to service because that tells me really how much profit you can potentially make.
If there's a small market, that means you won't make a very good profit.
Right. So there's a small market, there's less opportunity to grow. In that case, then you might not be as attractive to an investor. But the question becomes, how do we establish a good estimation? And there's a couple ways to do it. There's a top-down method. There is a bottom-up method. And there's also something known as the value method. We're going to first start with working on the methodology, which is the easiest, and that's the top down. So as we come through this, there's a couple things here that are important and what we're going to try to learn how to do today. We're going to look at TAMs, which are total addressable market. We're going to look at SAMs, which are serviceable addressable markets, and market share, in this case, what we're going to call is serviceable obtainable market. Your market share is actually the percentage that you can actually sell to or that you actually do sale to. So oftentimes, guys, you'll find with the TAM is they're way overestimating their markets as we come down through the process. It makes it look more attractive than it really is, and it's not necessarily an honest view of what you can absolutely gain. So as we look at this market sizing, guys, the market size is made up of the total number of potential buyers of a product or service within a given market and the total revenue that these sales may generate. So when we look at TAM or SAM or SOM, what we're looking at is it's revenue driven. Okay, so I'm going to give you a revenue value. I'm going to give you a numeric value in dollars. I'm not going to give you necessarily, you will have the amount of customers because you have to calculate it. And it's a pretty simple calculation, the number of customers times the number of transactions times the amount of money per transaction. That tells me how much we can make in total. So that would be part of market sizing. We're going to look at some examples. We're going to look at some visuals that I think are going to help you kind of look at this. And the reason that we ask these questions is that we want to know, is this market big enough to warrant business? Is the market too big for our business idea to really get traction in or to take hold? Is the competition too strong? And then finally, it gives us an idea and a rough one of how much money we could actually make. When we go through this, guys, it's very, very important that we look at this and what it means in essence. Thank you so much, Alex. Perfect timing, my friend. So I got some hot tea here. Let's continue the discussion. Now, as we come down, guys, here's a visual. All right. And I'm going to put this presentation style so it looks bigger and better. Now, when we're looking at the global market, this could be a global market from whatever it is we choose. We're just doing here. We're going to say it's 125 billion. The total addressable market is smaller. Okay, so you could call this blue part really the pan market. That means the entirety. It's not necessarily addressable. If I'm a bank that's working in the United States, I'm not going to be working within the European theater. So it limits that size, and you have to take that into account. Here's a view of really what TAM, SOM, and SOM are. Okay, and you can see here that the size of the TAM is bigger than the SAM, which is the total addressable market, the serviceable addressable market. So that's what proportion really does fit your business. And here's the important part here, guys. The serviceable obtainable market. What proportion can we actually reach? All right. That's why it's the smallest one, because we can't reach everybody. We can't reach most people initially, but we can reach, and I like some because it kind of like some. We can reach some people, and that's it. Now, if I look at this again, I want to show you right here. Here's a shortened example for Airbnb. We're not going to actually, this one comes off as a bit too long, and we're going to watch some of this cut down on Friday, excuse me, on Thursday, Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, excuse me, I'm getting my dates messed up. This, though, you can access, and it's in access, and it's an entirety of a video. We're going to watch some of it, just not today. But you can see here, guys, look real quickly. If you look up here, Brandon, this is just a real simple view. If we look at Airbnb, I'm going to walk you through this one. So 1.9 billion, that's dollars, all right, $1.9 billion worldwide. And these are trips that are booked, okay? These are trips that are booked, and we might even say this is really trips that are booked in any manner, through the phone, online, whatever. Then let's look at that SAM, that serviceable addressable market. It's smaller. Yeah, it's just, now we're just looking at,
The United States.
well, possibly just the US, or more importantly, it has it delegated here, the budget and online trips. So this doesn't include every type of trip. An Airbnb customer, because when you're thinking about this, guys, we talk about it. Our customer segments first, then our value proposition. So we're kind of looking at our segmentation here for sure. This is not, and it's not going to reach everybody. Airbnb is not something that a wealthy person over 60 is generally going to use. All right, they might go through an agent, they might go through a company, a little bit different than Airbnb. And then if you look here, guys, here are trips with Airbnb that are actually from their quantity. And what they're doing here, honestly, if I'm looking at this is not putting a monetary value. I think this is putting the number of, because if it was a monetary value, this would be getting to too low, because we know that Airbnb is not just servicing $10.6 million. All right, it's more than that. So this is one example. I'm going to go through
Hello, this is Major Chen.
the next one right here, which is some more visuals for you. And this is a visual that I like, but it's the reverse, okay? Normally we have the TAM on the top. If you saw the other visuals, this one is showing the iceberg. And we all know that what 90% of the iceberg lies is underwater. So that's your TAM right here. You know, this big part. And then you get some to your serviceable, addressable, and then finally your obtainable. So this is what we can really attack and gain. So probably in essence, in this case, it's 10%. Is that a fixed number? Heck no, it's not. But it's a good example. So it's another good visual.
10% better than 0%.
It's 10% is better than 9%. So guys, and here you can look at, for instance, evaluation of the LED market. So you can start with your total available market. It's the total market size. So we might say the total LED market size. But now let's focus on the serviceable. And that's where our product is targeted and our own technology. And, you know, ours might be, you know, color LEDs. So it's a segment of the market. It's not the entire market. So already our market is shrinking as we go down. And that's the serviceable available market. It's limited by your technology, by your service, by your region or your geography. It can be limited by, or your price. So all of those things can be limiting factors that reduce from the TAM, the total, to the serviceable, and then finally to the obtainable, okay? And the obtainable market is what's realistically can be garnered, and you have to consider your competition, the countries, the trends, expected demand and growth. And so, you know, it's the most realistic estimate. And often I will say it's not necessarily even that realistic. Here's another one, guys, you can look at that deals with corporations that are using Excel, okay, and how we would kind of move through this one depending on the product that we were offering. So guys, you know, all of these are good examples. All these are good visuals, but the truth is it comes down to the fact that we have to do some research to do this. And there are lots and lots of research sites that we can use. So, and in here, actually, if you look at this, there is within this all kind of data that you can look to. And we'll look at that. We're going to get more in detail with this as we move forward with our project. Right now, it's kind of that overview. I just wanted to get you a taste. And so here is an example of a total addressable market. There's more visuals here that you can read through, but this is the first one that we're going to look at. All right. And this is kind of how do you calculate it? And, you know, there is a methodology, and I'm going to go ahead and play this and present it so we can watch together. And here we go.
This video was brought to you by us, Slidely. Make beautiful slide presentations in no time. Get 1 free month by signing up at slidely.com.
By the way, that was just a value proposition. Make beautiful slide presentations in no time. So that was a value proposition that you just saw.
I just call that PowerPoint, but I need to pay.
It's PowerPoint, but it does so. Okay, good thing here that Brendan brought up, guys. It might be PowerPoint that you pay to play, but it adds those factors that PowerPoint might not have, and that's where its value comes in for the customers, guys. And PowerPoint is kind of meh. It's that kind of meh feeling. If you've grown up with PowerPoint like I have, you're kind of like, it's meh. So definitely something to think about. That was an interesting introduction because it really had a value proposition to start.
/YouTube. One of the most common questions we get is how to calculate a market size slide. After so many years of this, I believe I can come up with a decent market size estimation, certainly much better than I used to. But in order to explain this in the best possible way, we've invited Steve Parks, one of the managing partners at Dream Adventures, and also an angel investor, to tell us all about it. Hi, let's start with some basic definitions. So what TAM, or total addressable market, what is it? It's the total market demand, meaning all revenue for a product or a service. Now, sometimes people also talk about SAM, which is the service addressable market, which is the segment of the TAM targeted by your products or services within a certain area, like a geographic region. Now, I'm not a big fan of things like SAM and SOM. So in this episode, we're just going to focus on TAM. We'll talk a little bit about how go-to-market strategy can impact TAM, but we're going to focus on TAM.
And I feel bad for all the SAMs out there.
So what's the first big mistake that we see startup after startup make about TAM? And that is they take a top-down approach. They say it's a huge market, and if I just get 1% of the market, it's enormous. And our answer to that is no, absolutely not.
And guys, TAM is the top down is what we're going to look at first, but I want you to know that it has limitations, and you're going to see those limitations here.
This video was brought to you by us, SlideBeat. Make beautiful slide presentations in no time. Get one simplicity and mistakes that we see startups after startup make. This week alone, I've probably talked to a dozen startups, and out of 12 startups, 11 out of 12 made these classic mistakes besides the top-down mistakes. So let's go into that and break down and give you some examples. When you say the number of customers, times the number of customers, the first question I want to understand is, well, where are your customers? Are you talking about the US market, the European market, the global market? You're going to have to cite your data, but when you calculate the number of customers, what is that total number? What is the market?
And guys, that's important what he just brought up. You are going to have to cite your data. So if you get some data that you pull it from a website, you need to include that link within your analysis. The reason being, guys, is if I'm a business person, you better believe I'm going to be checking your references, so to speak. And in this case, with your data, I'm going to be checking those sources. Because if I just came in and said, bam, abracadabra, that's not a source.
You're addressing. The next question is going to be around price. Remember, we're saying that TAM is the number of customers times the price. And the question is, how do you know if your price is accurate? Now, if you're a little later stage startup and you're raising a Series A or a Series B, maybe you've been doing some selling and you have accurate pricing. We see a lot of early stage startups, and their pricing is highly inaccurate. So if you're trying to calculate your total addressable market, number of customers times the price, and one of these two numbers is way off, the number of customers is way off, or the price is way off, your total addressable market is unrealistic. So big point around pricing. Have you tested and de-risked your pricing? Because otherwise it's an assumption. Let me give you an example of a mistake I saw a startup make the other day. They did their TAM, they showed the number of customers times the price, and I said, wait, $5,000 per customer per month? Where did you get that price from? And they said, well, that's what a competitor charges today. And I said, well, is that what you're going to charge? No, we're going to charge a tenth of that. Well, then your TAM is going to be a tenth the size. You can't use a competitor's price. You have to use your price. Customers times the accurate price that's been de-risked, it's not an assumption, you're going to get towards TAM. The other thing we're going to talk about again and again is when you're showing that TAM, if you're building on a slide using a product like SlideBeam, you're going to need to document your assumptions on your slide. Like your high school math teacher used to say, show your work. So we like to see it, dream it, and it's great to use a product like SlideBeam to show this as well. When you show your TAM calculation, put footnotes on the bottom of the slide as to where that number of customers came from, where that pricing comes from, and document it and show your work. So let's talk through two real-world examples and show you how this works. Let's do a cybersecurity company first. We meet with a lot of cybersecurity companies. Hands are waving all the time at how big the market is. So let's say I was meeting with an early stage founder and startup, and they said, look, we've got a Swiss Army knife type cybersecurity product. It crushes nearly every cybersecurity problem, major problem that a company would have. So the market's huge. Cybersecurity is a $1 trillion problem, and the market size is $250 billion annually. That's billion with a B. Well, there's an example, number one, where the startup just told me the size of the problem. I don't need to know the size of the problem. I need to know their TAM. And they're about to go down that top-down approach where it's a $250 billion market, but they barely exist in it. So how would you break that down? So what we're building is almost like a Swiss Army knife type of cybersecurity product that crushes nearly every problem a company would typically have. The market's huge. Cybersecurity is a $1 trillion global problem, and the market size is $250 billion a year annually. So I might drill into that startup and say, every company? And they'd say, well, not every company. It's really tuned for financial institutions. So you start drilling down on that. Wait, all financial institutions? You mean credit card companies, banks, insurance companies, mortgage companies? And we see this again and again. And the cybersecurity startup comes back and says, well, it doesn't really address this for insurance companies and credit card and mortgage. It's really fine-tuned for bank-specific issues, cybersecurity problems that happen at banks. So I might come back and say, wait, big banks like JP Morgan, Citibank, Chase, HSBC, they can come back and say something. Well, no, actually, it's really good for banks that don't have a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer. It's really fine-tuned and great for banks that have like a VP of IT or CIO, but they don't have a dedicated security function within IT. That's really where our value proposition shines. So startup comes back and says something like, we're like a security team in a box for small and mid-sized banks. That's our sweet spot. That's where our Swiss Army knife cybersecurity solution really works. We keep digging into that more. Wait, US banks, South America, Mexico, is this a regional issue? Is this a global issue? And we've done things like this at DreamNet and hear people come back. Well, we know it really works for North America, South America, and Europe. We don't have any idea about Asia or Africa. Okay, so then we're going to sit there and say to a startup like that, if they're trying to calculate TAM, and just first get a grip on the customers. So you're going to need to figure out how many medium and small banks there are in North America, South America, and Europe. Asia and Africa are going to be.
So guys, this is the importance. What he's saying is you've got to be specific. And often a mistake you see, and I've seen this in presentations from many groups, is when they present this, it's unrealistic. Their assumptions don't hold water. And it's critical. So what he's saying in this case is at first that this industry is $250 billion, but when you really whittle it down to what their product's trying to attack, it's quite smaller. And then, of course, that's going to affect the total addressable market. It's going to affect the serviceable addressable market and then the attainable market. So it's all interrelated, all these calculations. So you got to be spot on. You got to be able to limit yourself. You've got to be able to figure out what are your constraints to provide a truly accurate picture, not only to yourself, but to your investors. So it's important.
On the cake, but the total number of customers that you're going to focus on, particularly your go-to-market strategy, calculating TAM, is going to be those target customers that really fit the criteria of what you're looking for in the geographic regions you're looking for.
And guys, that's why segmentation is so important. We talk about the customer segments, right? It's driving our value proposition in many regards. It's the first step. That's the reason, because if we don't identify correctly our customer segments, we can't identify our possible market. And one of the big factors here is the research coming in and actually looking at what you are actually trying to do and identifying it correctly.
So as you think about all of these things, if you think about your target customer, your target geography, this is how you're going to start to calculate what the real number of customers are for your particular TAM. Now remember, we said TAM is number of customers times the pricing. So what's the pricing? So I might say to a startup, so tell me what your pricing is. Well, we think it's going to be around $10,000. Well, $10,000 per what unit of measure? Per month, per user, per bank, per branch? Again, we see these problems again and again. What's that unit of measure? And a lot of this gets back to willingness to pay, or WTP. What is that customer willing to pay, and what is that unit of measure that you're using when calculating pricing? So now what you're going to do, let's say they came back, well, it's $10,000 per branch, not just per customer, but these are banks, and banks have branches. So they could come back and say, well, it's $10,000 per branch, per month, for small to medium size.
And there is the formula in essence, guys. It's the price times the number of customers times the number, of transactions. Okay, and it could be multiple transactions within a year, depending upon your service.
Price banks in North America, South America, and Europe. Okay, now you can come together and calculate what your real TAM is. The number of customers times the pricing and think it through. And oh, by the way, if you remember when we started with this example, it's a $250 billion a year market. All of a sudden, your $250 billion a year is $250 million a year. And you might be thinking, I was wondering why I wasn't getting meetings with investors when I'd send them my pitch deck, because they were laughing at your TAM slide because your calculation is way, way off. You're not thinking realistically about the customers you're going after, the customers you're targeting, and what your real pricing is. By the way, the example I just did of the cybersecurity company, in Dream, that we call that narrowing of the TAM funnel, right? Where we start with this really big TAM, but the startup is unrealistic around who their real target customers are. And the more you drill down, the more you think critically about who your true target customers are, the narrower and narrower your funnel gets to what your real market size is. It's a common mistake we see. So just make sure as you think through what your TAM is, you're talking about your real target customer. We find also people are way off about pricing. This is for both pre-seed, seed, and Series A companies. You need to nail this because an investor wants to understand how big a market are you going into. So realize we see most startups are wrong about both things, number of customers and pricing. And if you're multiplying two wrong numbers times each other, you have a huge problem on your hands. Your total addressable market is ridiculous and not realistic for what you're looking to do. Let's think through slide beam, right? What would we think about if we're talking to Kaya and going through this same drill? So I would ask slide beam as a startup or as a company, who's your target customer? For instance, is it all startups, like angel and seed startups? Is it Series A, B, C, and D level startups? For instance, are Uber and Airbnb going to use SlideBeam as they're doing their mezzanine round raising $4 billion? Probably not. Like a lot of great companies, a lot of great startups, they know where to focus. SlideBeam focuses on early stage. It's perfect. It's a perfect fit. Now, I might also ask, who's your target customer? Is it pizza shops? Is it laundry? Or is it high-tech startups? Because what I want to try to do is start to narrow that funnel and really make sure I accurately understand who that target customer is. Next question is going to be around pricing. Well, we know what SlideBeam pricing is today, but think early on, what's your pricing and how do you know? The next thing we think about is geography. Is it all companies? Is it globally? Or is it specific regions? For a company like SlideBeam, it's probably global, but something to think about as you think about that narrowing of the funnel. So now SlideBeam as a company has been evolving over time, and they have a new service offering, right? So now they have to do their TAM of both the product and the service. Are they the same target? Are they different targets? Is the pricing different? So now the TAM in this situation, you'd add up the TAM of the product offering, the TAM of the service offering, and that would be the combined TAM, and you do the math. And you do that all bottoms up. That's how we do slide. By the way, as we talk about TAM, let's also hit upon what investors, venture capital investors, are typically looking for. They're often looking for companies that are going into a billion-dollar market. That billion-dollar market minimum is defined as your market. It's going to be based on your pricing. Why is that? They want to make sure you have enough room to maneuver if the market's big enough. If you just get that 1%, that means you're doing $10 million in annual recurring revenue. It's a big enough market to support a venture-backed startup. So there's a lot of variations to startups. And what I want you to do is I want you to challenge your thinking and challenge your assumptions. This model works again and again across industries, whether you're B2B, B2C, D2C, whatever markets you're going into, it works. Let's say you wanted to build a new social network. Well, what are the total number of users you're targeting times what you do for advertising? How are you going to make money? You need to think those issues through. Are you going to be on pay-per-click, or is it going to be cost per thousand, CPM? How are you estimating it? What's your premium you're going to charge for all of this? So the same model works. How many customers? What's the revenue, or what's the pricing per customer or per whatever unit you're selling? Let's say you want to build a new product or device. Same model works. You want to build a new e-commerce company. TAM calculation works. You want to do DTC. TAM calculation this way works. You want to build a company to compete against Airbnb and VRBO. Same model works. What's that target number of users? What's the pricing going to be? Okay, so that's it. What's a great TAM? It's not top down. It's not the size of the problem, and it's not the size of the market today. It's not what everybody else is doing, what all of your competitors are going to be doing. It's going to be your TAM. What's your TAM? It's the number of your target customers times your price. Remember to show your work, cite the data, and also talk about the geography that you're estimating with it. So Kaya and SlideBeam, thanks for having us on.
So guys, that's a great summation. really of what it is. And that last part of the slide, I think, where he talks about the number of customers times the price. That's the basic breakdown. Now, despite his railing against it, and I would agree it's not the most accurate method, we're going to start with top down because it's the simpler method. Okay. And we will look at bottom up as well. And we'll also look at the value theory as we move forward. So that's one example. So, yeah, my camera's, it's not showing the camera, but it's still on there, buddy. Okay, so we've got some examples here, and some of these are interesting. So, this one, we're going to look at the cheese market, and we're going to do this one together. So open up your market sizing slide, your market sizing, sheet. It's this one that says market sizing examples. It's got lots here below. Okay, it's got daycare, skateboards. These are all examples that are done, and there's some practice ones that you guys are going to do. So let's take a look. Let me go check real quick with Brandon. What's going on, Brandon? Would you bring your computer up here, buddy, and show me? So at the bottom, you should have all of these.
This is the only thing that's
Yeah, you need to get out of that, buddy. You need to hit this and go to where you can see the whole thing. So guys, whenever you're opening up these documents, always open it up and go all the way. Okay, so if you look at the bottom, yeah, I did have it open. Is it still loading? Let me check this out, buddy.
Stop loading.
Yeah, see at the bottom, there's all these little different ones.
Oh,
That's why.
see that.
Yeah, so this is important, guys, that you see here on the bottom. If we're looking at this, the bottom of this sheet has what we call tabs. Tabs are pages within an Excel or a Google sheet. Okay, these are called sheets. They're not called pages, by the way. This is a different model. We're not going to use this one. The one that we're going to look at is the one that has been provided. Okay, and this is the one that's been provided. And this is where we're going to kind of go through some examples together. So I'm going to take all of this right here. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to copy it. And I'm just going to move it down to here. Okay, because this is where we're going to do our first one. And the first one that we're going to do together, Brandon, we're going to do it. So you see what I just did, buddy? I copied all of this and I just pasted it right below. All right, so we're going to do one, and the one we're going to follow along with these guys. Okay, so they're going to actually do it for us, but we're going to do one regarding cheese. Yes, my favorite consumable product in the world. I love cheese, so I'm going to put here cheese. Now, what we're going to calculate with this, we're going to do what kind of a consultant would do. Many times when you come into interview as a consultant, you're going to be given a barrage of questions. They're going to, of course, ask about your history and experience, but they're going to want to see you do the work, okay? And that's where this comes in. Now, we're not going to cite too much on here because when you're doing this as a consultant, it's going to be more of an estimation. However, we could look up quite a few things regarding the cheese market, but we're going to trust these guys. And maybe afterwards we'll do our own analysis just to look and see how accurate that really was. So we're going to watch this. I'm going to write down some information. You can have them both open if you just want to listen and fill in some information. But let's go ahead and let's check out the market sizing example of cheese. And already, guys, you can see right here, they're pricing their TAM model. And they're going to be using TAM in this case just because it's a simpler method. I think that bottom up is probably the preference, and the great preference is to have the two meet, to do both and have them meet in the same place. And we will see some of that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and show this. I'm going to be taking notes as we do it. You're going to see this is not overtly complicated when we look at this through examples. So this is our cheese example today. And here we go. And remember, guys, they're going to talk about this idea, kind of a thinking framework. Your framework is the structure of your thought process. And that in itself is maybe even more important than the details. So let's go ahead and knock out some cheese.
I'm Sean Blackman, the CEO of Consulting Confidant.
My name is Robert Anderson. I am the strategy engineer of Consulting Confidant.
Great. So today what we're going to do is a live case demonstration for a market sizing case. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking that market sizing cases are actually not as common as an entire case. And that's true. We don't see a lot of market sizing cases where that's the only part of the case. However, what we do find is the principles that will lead you to be successful in a market sizing case are the same principles that are going to lead you to be successful in any other case, profitability, growth strategy, etc. Now, these principles to keep in mind while we're going over these market sizing cases is that you want to use a structured problem solving approach, and you want to think about what.
So you want to have a framework for your thinking, guys. We're not just shooting off the cup. We have a systematic way of evaluating this information. That's important because we're going to take this systematic way, we're going to replicate it, and we're going to apply it to different cases. That's what part of this class is. Our big systematic framework in this class is the business canvas. Okay. Now we're just extending it to another model. All right.
Drivers, and how do you break down a more complex problem into smaller, simple pieces that you can get to the answer more easily and more quickly. So let's get started. Great. Let's do it. All right. So your client is the wise cheese connoisseur, Steve Urkel. And Steve was wondering what the market size for cheese is in the United States by revenue.
Great. If I could just drop a framework really quick, I'll circle back in 15, 20 seconds.
That sounds great. All right, now would be a great time for everyone at home to pause the video and take about 60 seconds or less to drop a framework on how to figure out the U.S. market for cheese in terms of revenue.
And guys, don't worry about that right now. We're going to watch this framework.
We want to start off with the number of people. We have the quantity that those number of people eat times the weeks, and multiply that by the dollar amount. We'll have the revenue amount for the cheese market in the United States.
Now, there's one thing I'd like to point out that Robert did very well here. If you notice, when he goes over his framework, he talks about the entire equation holistically before diving into any of the individual variables. For example, he says we want to go over the number of people, multiply that by the amount of cheese that they're eating in a given amount of time, multiply that by the price per cheese, and that'll give us the amount of revenue. Now, let's contrast this with the other approach, which is definitely suboptimal. That is where you don't explain the entire equation before diving into the numbers. So they might say, all right, we want to know how many people are in the United States that are eating cheese. Okay, well, there are blah, 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 blah. And they're going over this before they even outline the entire equation. So you don't really know where they're going, and the interviewer is probably sitting there a little bit confused, hoping they're going to take it the right direction, but really unsure of what's coming next. That makes sense?
Going into the number of people is the market we could segment.
And Robert does a great job knowing to segment the market at this point. In every market sizing case, well, in almost every market sizing case, you're going to get a large aggregate population. That's going to be very difficult to estimate how much they do X, how much they eat, how much they purchase, how much they sell, etc. And the best way to do this is to disaggregate it. It becomes a lot easier to say, well, we have people who are lactose intolerant, they probably eat this amount of cheese. No. And then you can find something that you're already familiar with. You're probably familiar with the amount of cheese that you eat, and you say, okay, well, I eat this amount. Where do I probably fall? Am I in the middle range? Am I in the high range? This way you're using real numbers and you're able to tie that back to the actual question.
Going to have, those Steve Urkels, those people who have that high affinity for cheese that are eating it a ton.
Yes.
So these are going to be our cheese lovers. This is our high market. Next, we have our average Joes, the guys that,
So guys, he's segmenting his market right here. And this is important. This is really, really important because that way we can try to figure out usage. I could have a population of 200 million people and 50 million are big time cheese eaters. 50 million eat a moderate amount. And then that other 100 million don't eat so much. So you can't necessarily apply the same number to the entire populace. I like that idea of breaking it down within the market.
Eat their occasional pizza, also eat this and that, go to the grocery store, buy some cheese. So this is our medium market, our average Joes. Lastly, we have our low market, people who don't really like cheese or are lactose intolerant. So this market might be non-existent, but we also still have that average market and those cheese lovers.
Yeah.
So if you could give me a couple seconds to go over some numbers, I'll circle back. Let's do it. Great. So going into the high market, we could safely assume that about 15-20%, so about 50 million people will be loving cheese and, eating it a ton. That average market that, I could definitely identify with, let's safely assume that that's about 200 million people. We think that's, safe 75% of the market.
Yeah.
And that lactose intolerant market's one that we can put our fingers on at about 15 to 20% as well. Same amount as that high market. And these people are really going to be buying cheese That's about 50 million people as well, and we probably run across this sophomore demographic because they're not really buying cheese, doesn't make them feel too well, and we're not getting any revenue from this market.
So already eliminating part of the market. So the way I would look at this is, guys, high, average, and low in this case, because we're talking about consumption of a food. And we're kind of eliminating that 50 million off the bat. There's 300 million total there. So now we're down to what? How many people are there, Brandon? There's 300 million total, but now I've knocked off 50 million. How many I got left? Yeah, 250. Okay, so I got 250 million possible consumers. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Good. So let's start off with the average market. This one with the quantity of cheese I can identify with, so I can put a number to it pretty easily. I could say I eat about a pound of cheese a week with the pizza and the cheese I get from the grocery store, things about that sense. So I could put a pound for myself, and we have 50 weeks in the year, which gives me a quantity of 50 pounds per year.
Notice how Robert takes an extra step when figuring out how much cheese he eats in a year. He doesn't immediately go off and say, okay, I eat.
And guys, also notice, how many weeks are there in a year? There's 52. We're knocking this down to easy numbers to work with. If we get more exacting data, we can provide that. But in a case like this where we're consulting, we're just knocking it down to numbers that are workable. All right. In this case, this is a moment where you'd be going into an interview. It's a little bit different than what we're going to be working with because he doesn't have access to this data. He's just creating a framework to where if he had perfect data, this is how he would apply it. All right. So if you look at that, guys, we're talking about 200 million doing 50 pounds a year because we're doing a pound a week times 50 weeks, we're assuming. All right, even though it's 2 less than it really is. So that gives us kind of a number right there to work with.
100 pounds a year per year. I eat 50 pounds of cheese per year. Although we get to that second answer, he puts it into a realm that is much easier to comprehend and visualize. It's a lot easier to know how much you eat on a weekly basis than even on a monthly and especially on a yearly basis. So this is almost a microcosm for the general principles of a market sizing case. You're taking something bigger and more complex, and you're breaking it down into simpler components that are easier to visualize and easier to estimate.
For myself and other people that average eat cheese, such as myself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In the high market, we can safely assume that people who love cheese and have that affinity are probably eating twice as much as those average people. Going out for pieces of time each week.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good assumption.
Yeah.
So in that second one, there you go.
Times the 50 weeks as well. And going back to that low lactose intolerant demographic, we cross it out because these people aren't buying cheese and not really that makes sense. Right. So starting off with the high market, this one we have first, we have 50 million people, and these people are eating 100 pounds of cheese per year. So 50 times 100 gives us that $5 billion amount, or 5 billion pounds of cheese per year, even in this high market. Going into the dollar amount, we could safely assume that these people are spending about $5 for their cheese. We can have, higher price range for the organics and the lower quality at less. But when I go to the store and I buy the average cheese, it's about, $5 per pound.
Yeah.
So going at 5 billion in the terms of quantity in pounds for that pie group,
Right.
Times that 5.
So guys, we're going to get $25 billion in potential revenue for those high average cheese eaters, if you will.
Dollar amount at the price point, we end up with $25 billion in terms of the revenue amount for this high group.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Going into the average Joes, we have 200 million people who are eating 50 pounds of cheese.
So that's 5 billion, guys.
Per year. And this comes from the 1 pound in 50 weeks. So we have 50 pounds, and that will take us to 10 billion.
Oh, I'm off by one. Sorry.
200 million population and 50 pounds per year. And
Yeah, I didn't go to the 10. I forgot. I went to 5. I went to 1.
So if we take 10 billion and multiply that by the $5 price point, we have about 50 billion here.
Yeah.
Adding that market and excluding those intolerant groups.
Yeah, I missed the 10. 50 billion, not 5. Sorry.
$1 billion for the cheese market in the United States.
So there's your TAM, guys. That's 75 billion.
And the average group as well.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Now, the $75 billion to
Does it seem a little high? Does it seem a little low? After you finish the math portion,
So let's look up real quickly. I'm going to look up real quickly on this. What is the size of the cheese market in the U.S.? And let's just see. I mean, because his number's not okay. So he's way overestimating here, but that's okay because he doesn't have this data to refer to. So we can look here and see right here that the actual market is 35 billion.
He was close on the first one.
He was close for high, but that was only a percentage of the market. So the problem is it's high, but that's okay because it doesn't matter the numbers on his because it's the framework of thought. So it's not meant to be totally accurate. What we're trying to see here is what is this guy's critical thinking process? And it's spot on.
of any case, market sizing or otherwise, it's always a good idea to take a step back and do the sniff test. This is where you look at the number, you say, is this kind of high? Is this kind of low? Is this right in the realm of what I would expect? For example, if he came out with a multi-trillion-dollar answer for the amount of cheese that Americans purchase per year, then you would take a step back and go, whoa, there's definitely some kind of problem. Or it could have been, yeah, Americans eat $5,000 worth of cheese per year. Now you know that you're a little bit on the low side. So getting into the habit, taking a step back, looking at the number, and thinking about if this makes sense or not is a great way to go about it.
It seems maybe just a tad high. I would safely assume that the cheese market could be somewhere between, 20 and 50 to $60 billion. So 75 does seem a bit high. Maybe in terms of that sense, we can take the high amount of cheese eaters down to maybe 1.5 pounds per year to get a more realistic demographic. But I think we're around the ballpark here.
Now, one thing I'd like to point out is a certain skill that's going to be very valuable in your interview and in your consulting career. So what is this skill? Let's take a step back and think about what consultants do. Consultants solve complex problems in a relatively short period of time. Now, how do they do this? They use a structured problem-solving approach, they're hypothesis-driven, and third, they prioritize. They prioritize their time very, very stringently because that's going to make or break whether they're going to get the answer on time or not. So how can you show that you have this ability to prioritize during a case? Well, you might be able to get the answer, you might have the conclusion, it's backed by data, and then you can take a step back and say, well, look, if I had more time, we might want to dive a little bit deeper into this variable, because if this were to change, this could change our answer a little bit more than the other ones.
Okay. Yeah, I think orders of magnitude makes a lot of sense. Great, great. Thank you.
And that's our case. Great job, Robert. That was overall a very solid performance.
So basically just a very simple calculation there of cheese. Now let's look at this in our market sizing, okay? We're going to use the data, some of the data that he gave us, okay, right there. But first I want to show you, like, here's an example for daycares, okay? And this comes from the actual presentation, but I wanted to link it in here on the bottom. So these ones below, these are all already examples that are done that you can look at. So, and so you can have a reference here. It tells you the number of daycares. Now let's look at this. There's 94,000. There's an average of 25 parents per daycare, which they actually have their source here. 2 average views per day, average of 20 viewable days. And I'm assuming when they say viewable days here, they mean the actual amount of days that the child will stay there. So we've got our number of buyers right here because we're going to say 20 per day. So that's going to be 93, whatever. The math you're going to have to do yourself, to be honest. And you come up and you get this figure. So this figure is all of these times this to get to here. So you've got 93 times 25 times 2 times 20. And you can see the formula right here. C12 times C13 times C14 times C15. And you can see this up here, guys, if you look. There's the formula. All right, this is already in here for you. At some point when we get into financials, I'm going to work with you on how to do this. Right now, I'm just wanting you to see the framework of the process because this can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be. So here's our first assumption here. All of these right here, and we're getting this value of 93,583 million, 95 million about. And then the frequency of purchase, they're going to pay 12 months a year. How much do they pay per year? Or the average unit price.
122,000. That's a big number.
That is a big number. So it kind of could get complicated. Well, let's look at the one we just looked at, which is a little bit.
$1,122,996,000.
Yeah, that's true for the daycares. That is correct.
That's a lot
So
of money.
that's a lot of money. And you can see again, here's the formula, guys. It's C17 times the frequency of purchase. Okay, and that's going to get us the number of units in their mind, the TAM, times the price. Okay, so really what this always comes down to is the number of customers times the price they're going to pay. And sometimes it's multiple prices, like this is monthly, so it's 12 times a year. All right. Now let's look at the one we looked at under market size total. Okay, and it says cheese, and I'll probably just make another little thing here for us, but let's go with the idea. How do we get, so what's our starting figure? And in this case, our starting figure is what? It's the size of, yeah, in this case, we're going to say the starting figure is the number of consumers probably. All right. And we're going to say from our calculations, which we just watched, that there's around 250 million people that are going to eat this. And I'm just going to say, or we can even do this right here. Number of cheese consumers in the US. And let's see how many it is. It might be less. This is not telling me how many. Okay, this is telling me per capita. And it's giving me some facts. But we can use this here in a second. So let's just, we're going to make a big assumption here. And we're going to say there's 250 number of cheese consumers. So we're going to fill that out right there. Number of cheese consumers. And we're going to estimate that on average. So let's say the big dogs eat, let's actually get an average here. Let's look how much they actually eat. The average consumer in the US ate about 40 pounds of cheese per year. So let's put in 40 pounds, right? So we're going to do this. 40 pounds here. And you're noticing these numbers are changing because it's calculating for me, all right? So I'm going to put here, and you know what, guys? I'm actually going to come here, click on this, and I'm going to add this link. I'm going to copy this link into here, and I'm going to add it. So I'm just going to go here, and I'm going to paste. And there's a link to that actual statistics. And we're going to say, we know it's 40 pounds, and in fact, let me see if I can get to this. No, I don't know that. And I'm going to say average cheese consumption. All right. Now, we might go in next. That's all we need. There's no more. We've got a really simple number here. We've got the amount of customers, the amount that they eat. Now, here's what we got to figure out. All right. Because the frequency of purchase is, we already know we're not going to change this. If we did weekly, we'd have to put a 50 here, okay? But we already estimated this is the cheese consumption. Now I'm going to put this big word here, annually. All right, we kind of went a quicker route. What is the average cost per pound per cheese? What is the average cost per pound of cheese? Let's get this idea right quick. So it's 5.36 US dollars. So we actually have and I'm going to just put this right here. I'm going to take this. I'm going to copy this link. All right. Because I want to cite my sources, guys. I can't just put the frequency of purchase, like I said, because we're doing yearly per annum, we know it's 40. If I broke that down into weekly, that'd be like, 0.8 pounds of cheese per month. Then I'd have to multiply it times 52 and then times the price. In this case, we're not. So we're just doing it all together. So what I'm going to come in right here, guys, is I am going to put in the average price per pound because we're doing it by pounds. We know that. Average cheese consumption annually by pound. So let's expand that, All right. And we know that. Now let's add right here where it says average unit price. We're going to put 5.36. And here is the estimated market, which is 53 billion. Okay, so we're a little high. We're a little high. So what I'm thinking is probably we should reduce the number of actual consumers here from 250 million. Let's reduce it down to, what do you think, Brandon? 200 million? Let's do 200 million. And now we're down to 42 million. 42 billion for our actual TAM. This is all changed right here. So I think that's a good number for our cheese industry. Okay? It was a simple estimation for cheese. Now, next time we're going to look at, and in fact, actually, let's do it right now because we're right here right now. This is for cheese. Okay? We're going to do this again, but this time we're going to do it for wine. Okay? And let's see actually if we can calculate this together. So we're going to do wine. Just bring your computer, buddy. Just come sit up here with me. Oh, nice one. Okay, so let's do one for wine. So wine and cheese actually often go together, but let's do some research. All right. So this is not too difficult, I think, when we throw this down. So number one, so we need to figure out how many people consume wine in the U.S. We're not going worldwide here. We're not trying to service the entire world. We're just looking at the U.S. market. So how many people consume wine in the U.S.? This is giving me more so. Let's see if I can find stuff here, guys. Let's look at the alcohol industry per beverage. I can't get this because it's a paywall. But let's do this. We're assuming that there's 300 million people. Let's try this. Percentage of U.S. that consumes alcohol. Let's start there. And I spelled alcohol wrong, by the way. So 2/3 of adults. So let's say that our population is 300 million. 2/3 of that is what? 200 million, guys. So let's say 200 million, all right? And we're doing rough estimates here. Of those that consume alcohol, let's see.
11%.
So about 11%. So let's figure that out real quick. So we've got some information here. We're saying that 200 million, it's easier. Let me do it this way so you can see it. 200 million consume alcohol. Of those, the alcohol market, let's say, is 10% that are really big time wine drinkers. So 10% equals 0.10 times
22 million.
20. Is it 22 million?
11% divided by 5.
Okay, so 22 million is what we got. Now, this is not going to be the part where you're going to see when their analysis is going to be different than ours. Okay, but I want to show this to you because this is a way that you could do it quickly. But let's say that we saw what? We saw 200 million folks. I'm going to say 11% is probably not correct. Let's just say 50% of that actually consume wine. Okay, so let's get,
100 million.
yeah, so we're going to put right here 100 million wine drinkers. Okay, now my assumption is that these guys during the year, let's see, average number of bottles of wine consumed per capita. That's per person. So let's say on average, we're just going to give a guess here, that these drinkers consume, it says here 53 bottles of wine a year. I'm going to say that might be high. So what I'm going to go for here is a little bit less. And like I said, we're making lots of assumptions here. So let's just say that on average, people consume 30 bottles a year. Okay? Now, if you look here, actually, excuse me, We don't need to put it there. It's right here below. You can do it. Frequency of purchase, let's put 30 here. So frequency of purchase, we're going to assume 30 bottles a year, not 130. What's the average price per bottle? Okay, average.
Well, it's a type of brand,
It's
really.
per
or
bottle.
how rich it is.
No, it is, but that's why I'm looking for an average. That won't affect anything. The average then takes them to the most expensive. It takes them to the cheapest. It doesn't matter. The average price of red wine is $16 a year, okay? So I'm going to take this, put this in my assumption box too, which I didn't do for the other ones, which I should have done. But we're going to say here, I'm going to put it here. That's the search I did. Honestly, you would want to put the site to cite it, but I'm not getting that detailed. Let's put $16 here. And that puts our total market at 48 billion for wine. So let's see how accurate that is. Size of the US wine market. Okay, we're actually a little low. We're a little low. The actual size of the US market for wine is 61.8 billion. But for a really quick, rough estimate, we're not bad. We're not bad at all. So we're not in a bad spot. So what I took here is I took the number of wine drinkers in the United States. I took the total populace, multiplied that times the number of people that actually drink alcohol. Most people that drink alcohol, will probably taste some wine during the year, but some are avid drinkers, some are less. So we're just kind of taking an average here.
What happened to your 30 that was right there in assumption 1?
Okay, so good question. When I initially did this, I made a mistake. So I put the 30 because that's the frequency of purchase, Brandon. 30 bottles of wine. Yeah, you should move it down. If you don't, it should come up with the same thing if you left the 1.
40, yeah.
Yeah, you still have 48, but I do want you to move that 30 that I put here originally here because that's the frequency, the number of bottles purchased annually. Then, so I know the number of buyers. I know the number of bottles right here. So I know the number of units, which is right here, which is 3 billion. I simply looked for the average price per unit, which was $16, which is right here. And that gets me to this. The actual market size is 65 billion, okay? Dollars. So it's in the revenue. So two quick examples. And we're going to have to do some as well. We're going to do a car industry one, and we're going to do an EV car, and then we're going to do a mobile phones and a fast food. You guys are going to be responsible for those, but we're going to walk through them. We can walk through them some on Thursday if you have questions. If you have me up for Friday, you won't have this. But that, in essence, is the TAM using a top-down method. Okay, it's a rough estimate. It's not perfect, and you can see as we add more detail and more depth, it tends to get smaller, and that's what we want to do because we want to be accurate in our assumptions. Now, guys, that sums up our work. That sums up our information for TAM. I'm going to post this. I'm also going to post next period soon. So you'll see me go through this again, and you can watch both to get out whatever you need of it. Just remember that whenever we're doing this, guys, it's a process. A couple things. Very, very important that you get accurate information. Very, very important that you cite the information that you're getting and retrieving. And if you look in here, guys, there is a list of sources. I'm actually going to move this up. Here makes more sense. So let's go up for calculating our TAM. Now, let's look at this fella, okay, that actually does a wine example. And you'll notice how he kind of broke this down. So we'll finish up with this. I'm going to go ahead and play this. Not a long one, pretty quick, but it's going to go through what we did, just a different perspective. And probably maybe a little bit better estimation. We'll see.
For the common ones, would you do this total?
Hi, my name is Josh Abrio, and today I'm going to teach you about market sizing. The majority of consulting interviews will require you to do market sizing in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
You can begin a market sizing question as a standalone case, so this is less frequent, or as part of a broader business situation case, like entering a new market.
It's going on by one part a year.
This case type is used to test your quantitative and reasoning skills. The interviewer wants to evaluate whether or not you're comfortable working with numbers, whether you're capable of making good assumptions. You can be given a market sizing question as a standalone case, so this is less frequent, or as part of a broader business situation case, like entering a new market. This case type is used to test your quantitative and reasoning skills. The interviewer wants to evaluate whether or not you're comfortable working with numbers, whether you're capable of making good assumptions and handling ambiguity. It's important to note that there's no one correct answer to a market sizing case, but it's important to be in the right ballpark. That's within about 25% of the correct answer. However, what's more important than your answer is the approach that you take to solve the problem and the structure that you use. So now that you know a little bit more about a market sizing case, let's get into one. So the question we're doing today is how many bottles of wine are consumed in the US every year? And we're to assume there are 5 glasses and 1 bottle of wine. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to segment the population by age and then by profile. So I know there are 320 million people in the US. And I'd like to assume an average life expectancy of 80 years with an equal distribution of ages. This gives us 4 equal groups of 20 years each. The drinking age in the US is 21 years, which means that people from 0 to 20 are not eligible to drink, whereas people from 21 to 80 are eligible to drink. Given that the fact that we assumed an equal distribution of ages, that means that 1/4 of the population cannot drink, which is 80 million people, and 3/4 of the population can drink, which is 240 million people. Now I'd like to segment this population further by profile, or by the type of drinker they are. In my experience, there are 3 types of drinkers. People who don't drink at all, none, people who drink a medium amount of moderate, and then people who are very heavy drinkers. In my experience, about 3/8 of the population, or 37.5%, don't drink alcohol at all. 50% of the population drinks alcohol a moderate amount, and 12.5%, or 1/8 of the population, drinks alcohol a lot, or are heavy drinkers. So I'd like to put these numbers into table format for easier calculation. So here we have none, we have moderate, and then we have heavy. The first column is going to be the percent of population. So we said earlier, none makes up 37.5% of the population, or 3/8 of the population. Moderate makes up 50% of the population, or 1/2 of the population. And heavy drinkers make up 12.5% of the population, 1/8 of the population. Now, keeping in mind that our total population was 240 million people, I'd like to determine the number of people in each of these categories using those percentages. So to do this, I'd like to multiply the percentage by 240 million people. So 3/8 times 240 is 90 million people. 1/2 times 240 is 120 million people. And 1/8 times 240 is 30 million people. Now I'd like to make some assumptions about the number of drinks per week that people in each of these categories consume. So an average person who drinks none consumes 0 drinks per week.
It's a trillion.
Average person who's a moderate drinker drinks about 2 to 4 drinks a week. So let's say 3 drinks a week on average. And then a heavy drinker drinks about 10 drinks per week. So now we're going to calculate the total number of drinks per week. So to do that, we multiply the population by the number of drinks per week. So 90 times 0 is again 0. 120 times 3 is 360.
We're looking
360
at
million.
the average price
And
of
30 times 10 is
times the
300.
amount of units,
300 million.
and then times the amount of so
Now,
yeah.
summing this up, you get a total of 660 million drinks consumed per week in this population. Now, it's important to note that in this question, we're asked about the amount of wine consumed, not the
We're
amount
going
of
to go
drinks
through all these
consumed.
together, so I'm just trying to
In
see.
my
what the
experience,
it's probably
Beer and wine are the 2 most common alcoholic beverages consumed in the US. with hard liquor coming in a distant third. I'd like to assume that beer makes up 1/3 of all alcohol consumption, and wine makes up the other third of all alcohol consumption, leaving hard liquor to make up the rest. So with that assumption in mind, taking that 660 million figure and dividing it by 3, because we're assuming that 1/3 of all alcoholic beverages consumed are wine.
So what is this?
So that gives us 220 million glasses of wine consumed in the US every year. Now we were asked for an annual figure, so I'd like to annualize that 220 million by multiplying it by the number of weeks in a year. There are 52 weeks per year, but just for ease of calculation, I'd like to multiply it by the number of 50. So 220 multiplied by 50 is the same as multiplying 110 by 100, and that gives us
Here's
11,000.
the number sold in the US.
It's important to note that 220 figure was a million, so that's 11,000
The
million
direction's good.
or 11
Oh, here we are.
So 11 billion glasses of wine are consumed in the US per
So
year.
it's 70.
Now we were asked not for the number of glasses consumed, but the number of bottles consumed. And we were given the fact that there are 5 glasses in one bottle of wine.
What's the average price?
So I'd like to take that 11 billion figure
That's why I
and divide it by 5. So dividing 11 by 5 gives us 2.1 billion.
Okay,
So
then I
on
think we're
average
gonna go
in
by
the US,
starting figure is that,
2.1 billion bottles of wine are consumed every year.
the number of
And that's how you do a
sold
market size.
every year.
Well, there's also one from.
That doesn't matter. It only matters what's sold in here. Okay, guys. So there's his estimation for cheese. This estimation is a little bit different because he went more globally, and we actually went more into a smaller framework, which is fine. I think our estimate's going to be more accurate when we're coming down to folks that are living in the United States. So I'm going to stop it here, and we will then